should we hear what you have to say? So I never wanted to tell the story. I really didn't want to tell the story. I didn't want to point the camera at myself. I didn't want to point the camera at my family. But I felt it was a story that needed to be told. I'm very glad I told it because I hear from people when I screen it, other Asian Americans saying, you know, I had very similar experiences. So after I graduated, I needed something to do. And I felt that if I don't tell the story, I'll really regret it. So after graduation from Emerson, I moved back home and filmed for about a year and a half, and I've been editing since 2012, late 2011.
Was there ever thought of not having you so much in the film, or not having you in the film at all, because your presence is sort of there throughout? You know, you can feel your presence behind the camera as you're greeting folks. And
yeah, my initial goal, and that was the struggle when I was working on this, was I didn't want to put myself in it. My background is journalism, and you know, we're taught don't put yourself in the film. As I was editing and as I was sharing cuts with people, they were saying, you know, we need to hear this. We need to hear your story because this is about you. It's not really about your grandmother. It is, but it's really about you and why and who you are and how you cope with things. And my grandmother is a way that I've learned to kind of overcome any obstacles that I faced. So as I've gone through the editing process, especially with Cam and the CPB, they're pushing, you know, let's hear your voice, and I think it has worked for the better.
we're ready to open up for questions. Who wants to go first? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to ask, is there any way you've wanted to kind of further your look into your culture, like maybe even going to where you're from, or just kind of in your everyday life finding more ways to kind of be you or be, you know, Japanese or?
Yeah, the Italian side kind of especially too, because my family still lives in Italy, and they still have the homes where my uncles and aunts were born, where my papa was born. All that property is still there, and they still have those places. I would like to go back to Italy. Japan, yes. I don't know anybody. We don't communicate with people that are in Japan very often, so I think I would have a much richer experience if I went to Italy. And I'm also kind of, I'm not religious, and I'm not going to be religious, but I'm interested in learning about it more. I mean, I had 12 years of Catholic school, so I learned a lot about it. But I would like to actually learn about it, and not just be told what to think. I would actually like to learn about it. So that's kind of what I'm interested in right now, and I think that's kind of where I'll head.
Is there a question over here? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. So you mentioned that when you were a kid, you didn't want to be Japanese. But then at some point this changed and you accepted your loose face. I was wondering if there was a specific event that made you think this change, or if it was just growing up and thinking differently, or was there a specific?
I think it was leaving Cleveland. I had to leave where I was from because where I'm from, it's all my friends are Irish Catholics, and I needed to go somewhere else to be exposed to different cultures and to be exposed to different people who appreciated their cultures, diversity, really. I went to Ohio State. Columbus, Ohio was diverse. Boston was really, I mean, I didn't really figure this out until like 26, 27. And I don't know that there was a point where I said, okay, I love my heritage. I reached a point where I didn't care how I defined who I am, or what percentage of Japanese or what percentage of Italian. I stopped trying to think about it, and just kind of embraced it in any form that it came at me. So it was experience, really. I have to say it was just life experience, and getting out of a place that was trying very hard to define who I was. Because I'm the Asian kid. I mean, if I go back home, they don't call me Matt, they call me Yama. The whole area of Greater Cleveland calls me Yama. My last name's Hashiguchi. But when I was growing up, Christy Yamaguchi was popular. So my Irish Catholic friends call me Yama. So it was getting out of an area that was trying very hard to define, tell me who I was. That's kind of how I was able to kind of grow up.
Yeah.
Two questions. What's the most challenging part of the process here?
The most challenging was having to be a filmmaker to my family and to ask those questions that I don't want to ask, and to stick cameras in situations that I probably should not have done. I had a relative pass away during the filming of this, and I was filming that entire process, the ER, the hospice, and it was in the edits. It was in one of the early edits, but it was just too much, and it was too intrusive, and I had to be a family member first in that instance. The most rewarding is seeing my grandmother attend festivals. She was at the Cleveland International Film Festival, the premiere. She was at the Chagrin Documentary Film Festival a couple weeks ago, and she gets up and asks, I mean, people have more questions for her than they do for me. So seeing her receive the amount of interest and respect that she deserves has been the most rewarding.
You could hear she really endeared herself to the entire audience. There were just so many sort of
Yeah.
warm laughs.
I know. I wish I was as charming as her and positive. I mean, she has a positivity that no one in my family has. I don't know where this pessimism came from. But she has just this extremely positive outlook on life that I admire quite a bit.
Questions? Yeah. But
So, you mentioned that you had been thinking about making this film for years, and I was wondering, like, how much of the story, like, before you started filming, did you know, like, what you were wanting to kind of, like, achieve with the film, versus, like, how much did your family know?
Of like the camp experience?
No, just, like, what the message that you kind of wanted to achieve.
Not a lot. This wasn't something we discussed, like the struggle of being Asian. It just wasn't discussed. So I didn't know the story, and I didn't know the story until I started editing. I thought it was going to be something very different. I mean, if you look at early cuts of this, it's very different. So I didn't know the story until I started editing it. I had a number of questions that I was asking, and I was able to create, a line of story out of that. But my family, thought I was just wasting my time, to be honest. That I was just filming for fun. They didn't know what I was doing. My grandmother, and they got really annoyed.
you see that in one of the shots. Is it your cousin who's sort of putting her hand in front
That's
of
my
the
sister.
Oh, your sister.
Who was actually here today. And yeah, that became an obstacle too. Like, if I were filming someone that wasn't related to me and they said don't film, I'd probably stop filming. But since my sister or my grandmother or my aunt or my father or my mother were telling me don't stop, I just kept filming. So that was kind of a hard balance. But no, they didn't know the story. I didn't know the story, but these things weren't talked about. And that was the hardest part is, saying, yeah, I was called a Jap quite a bit, growing up. And hearing my dad say, yeah, I was called a Jap too. And then my grandmother going, yeah, I was called a Jap too. Like hearing this from everyone was just kind of, it should have been talked about.
And so now, has everyone who's in the film seen it, and what has their response been?
Yeah, everyone's seen it. My mother's embarrassed. My dad likes it. They're proud. Some stereotypes of Asian families are true, where they don't always express like what they're feeling or thinking. So they enjoy it, but they're withholding some things. I think it's embarrassing to them, to be honest. But they admire what I was able to do. And it's hard too, because there was a number of things that were discussed that I think people didn't want to hear.
Yeah, back there.
I'm mixed race as well, and half white, white American, half Chinese. So I'm really interested in hearing about other mixed race experiences
Yeah, something that I've noticed is that I kind of grew up in a Japanese American community, but I didn't have Japanese Americans that were peers, that were my age. It was my cousins and my siblings. I didn't have friends that were Japanese Americans. When I've been going to these Asian American events or Asian American film festivals, and there's other Asian American people around there my age, it is really weird for me because it's just so different. So I don't feel like I'm part of that community in a way. I embrace it and I cherish it, but I think that it's just very foreign to me. Italians know. I mean, God, growing up, I tried to connect with so many Italians, and they'd say, "Your last name's Hashiguchi. Like, what do you go? You're not one of us." So there wasn't. The Irish Catholics embraced me the most for some reason. I don't know why. But there was. I wasn't really able to like find a niche. And I guess I don't know. I don't really feel Asian or white. I've kind of stopped trying to figure that out and define it. I don't think it's worth it trying to define yourself.
Yeah, another breath.
Matt, thank you for making the film.
You're welcome.
You did something which actually speaks to not just Japanese Americans, but I think to almost everyone. People who are mixed race, people who are Japanese race in the common neighborhoods and African American neighborhoods of Iowa. Chinese American, white, mixed folks, and others. Because the story that you're telling is really of people who find themselves in their dignity in the face of affronts, in the face of difficulties, again and again and again. One of the most interesting parts of the film was actually when you were talking to your cousins. And they had a different last name. And the extent to which a difference in last name makes a difference in how you're treated. And at the same time, the way that you connected with them in that was so moving. I just want to thank you for making this film. Like everyone else that knows you, we were all sitting there wondering how it was going to come out. Yeah. And it's great. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. I think it's an American story. Yeah, the characters are Asian, but it's still an American story. I mean, my Japanese side of my family has been here longer than my mother's side, so they've been Americans longer, but people still perceive my Japanese side as kind of less American than the Italian side. So it's an American story. It's a shame that the Asian experience is still perceived as an Asian American experience and not an American experience.
So yeah, in the middle here.
Sounds like you had hours of video. How did you go about cutting the video? Did you have a game plan on what story you wanted to tell? How did you go about deciding?
I had about 70 hours of footage.
Whoa.
I knew that I wanted this anchored in my grandmother. She was the base, I knew that. It was figuring out, was this a story about my grandmother, her life, or was it a story about a minority experience? So the hard thing for me was taking out the very personal things that my grandmother would share. So for example, something like, she would talk about my grandfather, and she would talk about how she met him, and I kind of removed a lot of that stuff because it was just, it was too much about her and not so much about the theme of being Asian in America. Sharing this with people, also sharing edits with people, getting feedback, that was huge. Having people tell me what worked and what didn't. So getting criticism was extremely helpful and frustrating. I'm still getting it. I keep getting emails saying, you gotta change this, and it's really frustrating. Right now, I'm reaching a point where it's hard for me to edit this because I can only listen to my mother so much talk about religion. And, I want to move on, and it's getting hard, and I'm at home editing by myself, and I'm just hearing my grandmother talking, and my mother talking, and my sister and my brother, and it's just getting extremely, extremely hard right now. But one thing that I've learned is persistence from my grandmother. So I'm gonna reach the end. It's just very, very hard.
How will you know it's the end, that you're done, that's it, no more?
When the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and they write me the check, that's when I know that it's done. Because I keep sending it to them and they keep giving me notes back, so I'm waiting for them to. I thought I was done a year ago.
Right, yeah, sure.
I guess my question has to do with like different perspectives on the different people who are watching your show. So I guess, for example, like a Japanese national, if he or she has watched this, versus an Asian American versus a white American. Kind of curious if you've gotten a lot of that input and if there, what areas are similar and what areas are very different, and how you kind of manage that as a blend of all of them.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is that some of the edgy jokes that my sister says, some audiences laugh really hard at it, and some don't. I think that's really interesting. If it's playing to a like a predominantly white audience, you hear laughs at those moments more. But if it's playing to like a more ethnic or Asian audience, you don't hear those laughs. I think that's really interesting. I've heard a lot from Muslim Americans. I've heard a lot from Asian Americans. I've heard a lot from some Japanese born in Japan, and they corrected me on maybe something that is not true anymore. You know, what I think is interesting about this is my Japanese heritage. It's 19th century. It's 19th century Japan. So this heritage that my grandmother passed on to me, or that I have, it probably doesn't exist like this anymore. It's probably changed so much. So I've met a lot of younger Japanese, and they've said, you know, it's not like that anymore. That's not accurate. It's just changed. So it's like it's a pre 20th century heritage.
Hi, I feel like it's a very personal story, and it's very individualized, which I really appreciate. I'm Chinese and Irish American, and I was intrigued by your take on your identity, and like your cousin who looked towards the world perhaps as more white, and he said I would probably identify as more white. You know, for me, I look very Asian, I feel. But so it's really interesting, like having the outside define you, and I like how you're able to do that for yourself. And I think it's individual for every person, you know.
Yeah, it's hard, and I don't know that many people are able to kind of come to terms with that. I've met a lot of Asian Americans that I think have resentment about this experience, and I did a lot of resentment towards this experience. And I'm still kind of hesitant to share. Like someone asked me to teach them how to make sushi once, and I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy teaching them sushi because when I was growing up, sushi was this horrible food that people made fun of. And I felt like it was very fake that they wanted to learn sushi. So I think there's a lot of resentment in people that have struggled with this sort of thing, and